I call the member for Bowman.
Look, Deputy Speaker, in concluding this debate and on near unanimous support for this bill, I just want to observe that we are in a global battle against psychoactive substances, not just a national one or even a state one. Look, synthetic drugs are taking an ever-increasing share. We saw, obviously, heroin and cocaine popular in the 70s and 80s, replaced in the 90s, of course, where there couldn't be a party without there being a pill. Methamphetamines replacing amphetamine, and now ultimately these what we refer to as designer drugs. So it's important that government can respond to the ever-increasing threat. It's a complex and fast-changing one. We've been waiting a very long time, Deputy Speaker, for legislation that takes a standards-based approach and identifies not just individual molecular threats to the health of young people and people that ingest them, but take a standards-based approach and identifies that any substance that's not legitimately a pharmaceutical or a food that attempts in some way to create a similar effect to an illegal drug is just as illegal as the illegal drug itself. Look, we are tired of our law enforcement officers having to consume taxpayer-funded resources, chasing people who abuse these substances at enormous cost to the public, only to have the recipe slightly changed by the drug cook and then they can walk scot-free. We have an enormous scope and variety in these NPSs, or new psychoactive substances. They appear to be originating predominantly from parts of Asia and West Africa. And these networks are only just being understood now by the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. Increasingly, a large amount of product destined for Europe is going through Turkey. West Africa is providing increasingly the dominant global market of Southeast and Southern Asia. Still, the markets in Hong Kong, Japan and China are increasingly seeing the bulk of the trade, and around 36 tonnes of this material was intercepted by global authorities, but that's really only the top of the iceberg. What we know is that increasingly Japan and Malaysia are the targets, and wherever Southeast Asia establishes a supply, sure as you can be certain, Australia will be a target as well. Ketamine is another popular drug, traditionally well known to us in Australia as a veterinary anaesthetic, but still abused, and particularly in our near northern neighbours. So what precisely did Queensland do, the state that probably under Campbell Newman led the way as part of the Safer Night Out strategy, to come up with a legislative solution that other states have started to follow? And that's the important addition of a clause that any dangerous drug that intends to have a substantially similar pharmacological effect to a scheduled drug should be identified and is dangerous and is illegal under Section 4C of the Drugs Misuse Act 1986. And this made a very, very important change. No longer, Deputy Speaker, do we have this invidious delay between the drug being cooked up, hitting the market, and the authorities needing to respond legislatively. That delay no longer exists. We've also seen in Queensland some substantial seizures in the northern regions of Australia, with seizures in both Townsville last year and in Mount Isa under Operation Lime Evergreen and Operation Lima Evergreen and Lima Steward. So we need to be able to ban these products immediately. As soon as they hit the market, as we've said, when you see hoof prints, you don't think of zebras. They're clearly a drug that is being abused. It's being used by the same target market, and they're taking an extraordinary risk when they consume them. And this surge, of course, has just led to literally hundreds of these products. And as I've said, a simple molecular manipulation is enough to create a new product, but of course then it's mixed up in varying compositions. So we have the ridiculous situation where someone can take a simple leaf or a herb and take a hand sprayer, spray the psychoactive ingredient over it, chop it up and press it into a pill. It's that simple, but it's that unpredictable. The product that you might have had safely yesterday with the same name is no longer necessarily safe tomorrow. And what we have is this inability of us to be able to identify the life-threatening substance that has been actually consumed, let alone we are powerless to administer any form of ban to prevent that drug from continually being supplied. So we need to be able to act quickly, particularly in areas in drugs like mephedrone, where there's now an international agreement, thanks to the UK approaching the United Nations. But now reported globally are 348 of these products, and I'm sure even that number is old. And we've seen that the total number of substances mimicking cannabis alone doubled from 60 to 110 in just 1 year between mid-2012 and 2013. So it's important that we are standing here to stop the tragic deaths. Deputy Speaker, we are not going to stop people experimenting, And every behavioural psychologist will tell you that between the ages of 15 and 25, as our frontal lobe develops, young people will take great risks at that time of their life. All we can do as a society is delay the point at which that experimentation occurs and to reduce the intensity of it. And the common wisdom that's provided, and I know it's at Schoolies Week right now, as the Red Frogs teams around the Gold Coast and the Sunshine Coast will be working very hard even as we speak, is to stay in groups, stick with your friends, don't get isolated, and don't do drugs. It's simply the wrong place with no supports. Don't take those risks at any time, particularly at schoolies where you're most likely to be less risk averse. We need to, of course, ban the importation of these substances. That's obvious. The bill does that. But we are part of a global market, and the demand is in Australia, and so too will be the importation. The sophistication of these measures are extraordinary. Deputy Speaker, they are now able to basically purchase 2 postcards, use the obverse sides of 2 postcards, cut them down to be thinner, place some Glad wrap in between the 2 postcards. They can iron in some illegal drug in between those 2 sides of a postcard and meld them together and simply post drugs using standard delivery systems. We need to be able to stop, seize and destroy immediately, and the federal government gives us that option with this legislation tonight, supporting the states who have been calling for it for a very long time, asking for the federal support with preventing importation. Now, I do want to mention very briefly that, regardless of the name of these products, what you bought yesterday is not necessarily what you will buy tomorrow. The active ingredients, and the most common one was initially BZP, benzyl piperazine, but also trifluoromethylphenylpiperazine, pipernigram, phenylalanine, tryptophan and tyrosine. So they were the active ingredients initially. Now we've moved on to BZP-free drugs. These are also an increasing concern. So why are these drugs so dangerous? If they're just mimicking cannabis, isn't the easy solution simply to legalise cannabis? Well, the answer is no. For every reason that most of us understand in here, cannabis is an extraordinarily dangerous drug. There is a 0 safe dose for that drug. We should never be contemplating the legalisation of it, despite what some states in the United States may well be doing. But more importantly, there's unique characteristics of these synthetic cannabinoids that make them particularly dangerous. The first one is the absence of cannabidiol, which has some moderating impact on the tetrahydrocannabinol. The second one is that it's a full rather than a partial agonist, meaning that it acts on the CD receptors in a 100% effect, and the CD receptors are very common through the brain, neurologists tell me. And last of all, even the metabolites of these artificial cannabis products, even the metabolites still retain some kind of effectiveness. The great benefit of cannabis, of course, is that the active ingredient, once broken down, is no longer effective. That's not the case with these. So we take an extraordinary risk when we consume these artificial cannabinoids. Look, what Queensland has done, not just with artificial drugs, is a lesson to the rest of the country. What they've done with their Safe Night Out strategy is even more audacious and bold. And Australians understand that it's utterly unacceptable for people of any age to be out in a drinking precinct, being a danger to themselves and then needing the health system to bail them out, or a danger to others through alcohol-fuelled violence and health and hospital admissions. Deputy Speaker, it's not good enough to simply employ more police on double time, running around the streets, picking these people up and trying to keep them apart, having them refuse move-on orders, costing huge amounts of taxpayers' money, none of which is recouped from the offenders. It's not good enough to simply give them a suspended sentence. It's time for some serious law reform in this area. It's utterly unacceptable that these people do not pay the costs of their behaviour. If they are a threat to the lives and the health of others, they need to be charged for it. And if they're delaying or diverting or consuming police, ambulance resources through drug-afflicted behaviour, they need to be charged for it. And Queensland has taken the first trepid but significant step in this area with their sobering up centres. If you are deemed to be in that state of mind, you can be picked up by a police officer and not taken through that extraordinarily complex piece of paperwork that involves detaining, arresting, calling into court and running them through the legal system. This is clearly something not dissimilar to a basic infringement. You're there, you're consuming police resources, you're threatening the life or health of someone else, you're clearly a danger to the people around you, and Queensland will take these people, take them to safe sobering centres, and these people will pay a proportion of the cost of being detained before they are released. It's a very, very important step in that direction. Sure, these are stronger penalties, but nothing up till now has really worked very well. I think if I'm a parent and my children are in safe drinking areas, I've got the right to expect that they'll come home the next morning alive. That's a basic expectation, and it's inadequate that Australia and just a handful of countries cannot manage these illegal and illicit drugs and obviously risky alcohol-consuming behaviour. We are working hard with government advertising, but 20 years of that I don't think's made a jot of difference. We've had the alcohol industry on board working hard, but obviously in a conflicted situation. They are doing their best to ensure responsible drinking in venues and to make sure there's not a single pill in these places. But ultimately, I think initiatives like Drinkwise are encouraging. New apps are encouraging. We need people saying hello to Sunday morning. We need people knowing that you can drink responsibly and still be cool. I mean, ultimately, it simply isn't good enough to be carried out by an ambulance or arrested by a policeman and regarding that as being some rite of passage. Deputy Speaker, we have one opportunity here as a federal government to prevent the importation, to ensure that we seize these products, to clearly identify that these are illicit substances, even if you choose to tweak the molecule. This federal legislation does that, and I congratulate the government for its action.
I thank the member for his contribution.